She's got a gun and she's threatening me. Our crazy HOA. Karen just screamed this at 3 cops about my wife, Julie. I'm literally shaking watching this unhinged woman fake crying, pointing at my wife like she's dangerous. The officers are drawing weapons, ready to arrest my innocent housewife over this lunatic's lies. 6 months of pure hell, harassment, legal bills, this witch destroying our lives, and now fake gun threats? I thought we were done for. But then my wife pulls out some official ID card, and the officers' reactions are absolutely insane. What happens next will blow your mind. Smash that comment if you've wanted to see a Karen destroyed. Let me introduce myself. I'm Mark Garcia, a software developer who thought he was living the American dream. 3 years ago, I married Julie Turner, the most incredible woman I've ever met. She serves in the active duty army at the local base. I know she's an officer, and I've always assumed it's the administrative kind, paperwork, schedules, the desk work that keeps everything running. Julie's private about her job, which I respect. Military families have boundaries, and I have never pushed for details about her day-to-day or exactly what her rank means in the bigger picture. Our suburban neighborhood looked perfect when we moved in last spring. Tree-lined streets, well-kept lawns, kids on bikes, neighbors waving from porches. Hidden inside that postcard was a self-appointed guardian who would make our lives miserable. Her name is Cynthia King. She's our HOA president, though president flatters what she is. A former county planning department employee obsessed with something she calls community stability. She talks about eliminating transient elements that destabilize property values and neighborhood character. Translation: families like ours. The first shot across our bow came on a Tuesday morning in late September. I was working from home, wrestling with stubborn code, when the doorbell drilled like a fire alarm. On our security camera, Cynthia on the porch with an official-looking document and that smile people save for other folks' problems. I opened the door. She handed me a violation notice with the ceremony of a court summons. "Good morning, Mr. Garcia," she said, voice sugared just enough to sting. "I'm here about your unauthorized exterior modification. You'll need to address this immediately to avoid further penalties." I looked at the paper in my hands. A $100 fine for improper patriotic display non-compliant with HOA aesthetic standards. The offense? Julie had hung an American flag on our regulation flagpole in the front yard, the same flagpole that came with the house, positioned in the exact spot designated by the builder, flying the flag that honors the country my wife serves every day. "Are you serious?" I asked, genuinely confused. "It's an American flag on a standard residential flagpole. What's improper about supporting our military and our country?" Cynthia's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes. "I'm sure you understand that aesthetic consistency maintains property values for everyone. The flag display violates Section 4.7 of our community standards regarding visual uniformity. Payment is due within 14 days, or additional fees will apply." My first instinct was to laugh, honestly. This felt like harassment of the most ridiculous kind, and I was confident that documenting everything and taking her to small claims court would resolve the matter quickly. "This is clearly harassment," I told her, trying to keep my voice level and reasonable. "We'll document everything and take this to small claims court if necessary. This is obviously a case of HOA overreach, and I'm sure a judge will see it that way too." But Cynthia just smiled wider, and I swear there was something almost predatory in her expression. "Of course, Mr. Garcia. I'm sure you'll find our procedures are completely above board. Have a wonderful day." She turned and walked away with the confidence of someone who knew something I didn't, and that should have been my first real warning sign. That evening, Julie came home from base and found me stewing over the violation notice at our kitchen table. When I showed her the fine and explained what had happened, her reaction surprised me completely. Instead of the outrage I expected, she went quiet and studied the document with the kind of focused intensity I'd never seen her apply to household problems. She read the entire HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions overnight, I told her, watching as she disappeared into our home office with a cup of coffee and the thick binder of neighborhood rules we'd received when we bought the house. The next morning, she emerged with 17 separate procedural errors she'd identified in Cynthia's citation. "These aren't properly notarized per Section 4.2.7, she explained, showing me the discrepancies with surgical precision. "The filing procedures weren't followed correctly. the timeline doesn't meet the mandatory notification requirements, and the aesthetic standards she's citing don't actually exist in our official community guidelines. 2 days later, everything changed when I made a discovery that shifted this from an annoying neighbor dispute to something much more sinister. I was retrieving our morning paper when I noticed something white on our walkway, a notebook that had obviously been dropped by someone. When I opened it, expecting to find grocery lists or appointment reminders, my blood went cold. Inside were detailed charts labeled Military Family Assessment, with our address prominently featured. There were notes about Julie's duty schedule, observations about our daily routines, and most chilling of all, a section titled Deployment Windows Create Maximum Pressure Opportunities, Target Isolation Periods. This wasn't random harassment from an overzealous HOA president. This was systematic targeting, because we're a military family and someone had been watching us, documenting our lives, and planning some kind of campaign against us. When I showed Julie the notebook, her response was unlike anything I'd expected. Instead of shock or fear, she studied the documents with the same clinical detachment she'd shown with the HOA bylaws. But there was something different in her eyes, something sharp and calculating that I'd never seen before. She's documented our routine, work schedules, vulnerabilities, she said quietly, flipping through pages of detailed observations about our family. Someone taught her systematic targeting methodology. This isn't amateur hour, Mark. This is professional-level intelligence gathering, and whoever's behind this knows exactly what they're doing. The way she analyzed the threat, the terminology she used, the clinical assessment of our situation, it all felt wrong for someone who I thought pushed papers at a military administrative office. Mark confronts Julie about the notebook discovery. She goes quiet, stares at the targeting charts. Mark, there's something about my job I haven't told you. And if Cynthia knows what I think she knows, we're in much bigger danger than some HOA fines. What does Cynthia know about Julie that even I don't? The next phase of Cynthia's campaign began almost immediately, and it was clear she'd moved beyond simple harassment into something much more sophisticated. She launched a digital assault through our neighborhood app, flooding it with anonymous posts about security concerns from military weapons in, residential areas, and noise violations from early morning PT routines. Every morning at 0600, Julie would do her physical training in our backyard, standard military fitness maintenance that's quieter than most people mowing their lawns. But according to Cynthia's anonymous posts, we were running some kind of boot camp operation that disturbed the peaceful suburban atmosphere. The posts were carefully worded to sound like concerned neighbors rather than targeted harassment, but the timing and focus made it obvious who was behind them. Within a week, false incident reports started appearing in our HOA portal, faster than I could dispute them. Each report generated an automatic $50 fine, and the complaints were getting more creative and more personal. Intimidating military behavior toward neighbors, aggressive spouse interactions with community members, failure to maintain appropriate civilian demeanor in residential setting. The language was specific and calculated to paint Julie as some kind of threat to community safety. Every dispute required a separate hearing with its own $50 filing fee, a system obviously designed to make compliance cheaper than fighting. By the end of the first month, we were facing $600 in fines from an HOA that we'd never actually joined, and violations that existed only in Cynthia's imagination. The situation escalated when our neighbor Linda mentioned something that made my blood run cold. I probably shouldn't say this, she told me while we were both checking our mail, but Cynthia used to work for the county. She always had strong opinions about neighborhood stability, especially when it came to people she thought were temporary residents. That casual comment revealed what we were really dealing with. This wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. This was someone with government connections and bureaucratic experience who knew how to weaponize administrative systems. Cynthia had worked inside the county planning department for years, learning exactly how to manipulate zoning laws, building codes, and residential regulations to target families she wanted gone. When we met with our lawyer Stone for the first consultation, something felt off almost immediately. Instead of focusing on the obvious harassment and procedural violations, he asked questions that seemed oddly specific and strangely informed about military life. Has Julie ever faced internal disciplinary actions? He wanted to know. Any experience with command-level proceedings? How familiar is she with military administrative processes? When I asked why civilian HOA cases would involve those kinds of details, Stone deflected smoothly. but Julie's reaction was immediate and sharp. Why would a civilian HOA case involve those kinds of details? Seems irrelevant to property violations, she said, and I could hear something dangerous in her voice, a tone I'd never heard her use with civilians before. The financial pressure was mounting systematically, and every time we thought we'd found a solution, another obstacle appeared. The automatic fines through the app system were designed to create maximum frustration. Each dispute required separate paperwork, separate fees, separate hearings that always seemed to be scheduled when Julie was on duty at the base. Cynthia had also organized something she called a neighborhood safety awareness meeting about recognizing stress indicators in military families and civilian-military communication strategies for community harmony. The meeting was supposedly voluntary, but the implications were clear. Attend and let Cynthia lecture the neighborhood about how dangerous military families could be or face social isolation and increased scrutiny from neighbors who were being systematically turned against us. Julie spread the HOA app exports across the table and flagged 3 hard tells in under a minute. Complaint timestamps filed within minutes of each other by supposedly different households, identical phrasing across posts, and IP logs showing the submissions originated from the HOA office Wi-Fi. This isn't organic neighbor outrage, she said. It's a single operator running a coordinated campaign. The breaking point came when Cynthia escalated to community manipulation on a scale that made me realize we were dealing with someone truly dangerous. She wasn't just trying to collect fines or force us to comply with fake HOA rules. She was systematically turning our neighbors against us through a campaign of fear and misinformation. The safety awareness meeting was packed with concerned residents who'd been fed a steady diet of anonymous complaints about the dangerous military family living in their midst. Linda later admitted that several neighbors had approached her privately, asking if she felt safe living next to people who might have PTSD and access to weapons. The way Cynthia had weaponized legitimate concerns about veteran mental health to create fear and suspicion was calculated and cruel in ways that went far beyond typical neighborhood drama. That night, I overheard Julie on what sounded like an encrypted phone call, her voice low and professional in a way I'd never heard before. Yes, sir. Civilian targeting confirmed. Request permission to activate contingency protocols. The subject has county connections and appears to know operational terminology. She hangs up, notices me listening. Honey, we need to talk. Contingency protocols? What kind of administrative officer talks like this? Cynthia's next move proved she wasn't just some angry neighbor with a clipboard. She was someone with serious connections and the knowledge to use them. Within days of Julie's mysterious phone call, a building inspector appeared at our door, claiming he'd received anonymous reports about unpermitted modifications. The inspector was professional but thorough, examining every inch of our property with the kind of attention usually reserved for commercial construction sites. When I asked what specific modifications had been reported, he just shrugged and said anonymous tips had to be investigated regardless of their validity. The timing wasn't coincidental. This was Cynthia activating her network of county contacts to escalate the harassment beyond simple HOA disputes into official government action. The insurance adjuster arrived 2 days later, explaining that he'd been randomly selected for a neighborhood risk assessment survey. Again, the timing was suspicious, but the process was completely legitimate and professional. He spent hours photographing our property, documenting every detail from our fence height to our landscaping choices, and asking detailed questions about our lifestyle, work schedules, and relationship with neighbors. When I mentioned the ongoing HOA dispute, his interest sharpened noticeably. Have there been any incidents involving law enforcement? He wanted to know. Any complaints about noise, disturbances, or conflicts with community standards? I could see exactly where this was heading. Our insurance rates were about to become another weapon in Cynthia's campaign. The county planning department's involvement was the most troubling escalation yet, because it revealed just how deep Cynthia's connections ran through local government. A notice arrived stating that our home business license was under review because software development allegedly violated residential zoning restrictions that had never been enforced before in our neighborhood. I knew at least 4 other people on our street who worked from home in various capacities, but somehow only we were facing scrutiny. The review process would require multiple hearings, updated surveys, and compliance reports that could take months to resolve and cost thousands in legal fees. This wasn't random bureaucratic oversight. This was targeted harassment using official government processes as weapons. Our lawyer, Stone, performed so incompetently at the zoning hearing that I started wondering if he was working for us or against us. He failed to submit critical exhibits on time, used incorrect procedural objections that any first-year law student would have caught, and missed obvious arguments that Julie had suggested during our preparation meetings. When the hearing officer asked basic questions about residential zoning classifications, Stone seemed genuinely confused about fundamental legal processes that should have been routine for any competent attorney. "Are you actually qualified to handle this type of case?" I asked him afterward, and his defensive response only made me more suspicious about whose interests he was really serving. The most disturbing part was watching Julie analyze the coordinated campaign with what I was starting to recognize as professional military intelligence training. She'd spread documents across our dining room table like she was planning a military operation, connecting timelines and identifying patterns with surgical precision. This follows a systematic pressure pattern: administrative, financial, social, legal, multi-vector approach designed to make resistance more expensive than surrender, she explained, using terminology that seemed way too sophisticated for someone handling basic administrative duties. When I mentioned that she sounded like she'd seen this kind of campaign before, her response was carefully neutral. "I've seen coordinated efforts, Mark. The question is whether this is a personal vendetta or something bigger." The insurer mailed a non-renewal citing neighborhood liability risk. Without coverage, the mortgage auto-triggered a 30-day cure notice, secure a replacement policy at punitive rates, or face foreclosure proceedings. The timing lined up to the minute with the inspection and zoning review. That wasn't luck, it was a pressure bomb. Stone's Bungles bought 2 continuances and burned $4,000, exactly the delay window Cynthia needed. Her consolidated timeline made one thing obvious. App filings were prepositioning county actions within 5 minutes evidence, not paranoia. The community pressure reached a breaking point when Linda finally admitted what was really happening behind the scenes. "I'm sorry, Mark, but I have to tell you something," she said, looking genuinely frightened. "Cynthia threatened to report my contractor's unlicensed work if I didn't support her concerns about military disruption in the neighborhood. She knows things about everyone, building permits, tax assessments, code violations that were never reported. She's been collecting information on every family in the area, looking for leverage to get compliance or silence." This revelation changed everything, because it meant we weren't the only targets. Cynthia was running a systematic intimidation campaign against multiple families, using her county connections to gather dirt and force cooperation through blackmail and bureaucratic terrorism. The final shock came when Julie started referring to concepts and procedures that no administrative officer should know. She mentioned multi-vector pressure campaigns and bureaucratic warfare tactics, like someone who had studied them professionally. When I pressed her about where she'd learned to analyze coordinated harassment operations, her answers became increasingly vague and unsatisfying. "Every service member learns threat assessment, Mark. Military training covers situational analysis and pattern recognition. This is just applied critical thinking. But the depth of her knowledge, the precision of her analysis, and the professional terminology she used suggested something much more advanced than basic military training could provide. Julie finds a classified document slipped under their door, a copy of her actual military personnel file with photo, rank, and unit assignment. Handwritten note, "I know exactly who you are, company commander. Question is, do the neighbors? Does your husband? Time to leave before everyone finds out what you're really capable of. CK." How did Cynthia get classified military records? And what does she mean by what Julie's really capable of? Comment if you've ever had someone threaten to expose your secrets to destroy your life. This is about to get insane. The classified document that appeared under our door changed everything I thought I knew about our situation and about my wife. The personnel file was unmistakably authentic. Official letterhead, security classifications, detailed service record, and a photograph of Julie in dress uniform that I'd never seen before. But what shocked me wasn't the military bureaucracy or even the security breach. It was the rank insignia clearly visible in the photograph and the unit designation that made my blood run cold. Captain Julie Turner, company commander, with a service record that detailed combat deployments, classified operations, and commendations that painted a picture of someone who'd never mentioned any of this to her own husband. The handwritten note was even more disturbing. "I know exactly who you are, company commander. Question is, do the neighbors? Does your husband? Time to leave before everyone finds out what you're really capable of. It was signed simply CK. The financial warfare escalated immediately with a lien filed against our property for unpaid HOA assessments, the disputed fines that we'd been fighting through proper legal channels. The county recorder had fast-tracked the processing despite procedural errors that Stone should have caught and challenged. Within hours, a LS pendens was filed claiming disputed ownership, which froze all property transactions and made it impossible to refinance to pay our mounting legal fees or sell to escape the harassment. We were trapped financially, legally, and now apparently threatened with exposure of military secrets that I didn't even know existed. The coordination was perfect, the timing was devastating, and the message was clear: surrender or face complete destruction. I tailed Stone after the hearing and photographed Cynthia handing him a thick envelope in a courthouse-adjacent lot. Leaked emails filled in the quid pro quo, advance notice of county moves in exchange for clean losses on our side, plus a promise of $50,000 a year in HOA legal work. The email records that a sympathetic courthouse clerk leaked to me revealed the full scope of Stone's betrayal and provided the smoking gun evidence I needed to understand what we were really fighting. Stone had received advance copies of all county actions against us, allowing him to coordinate weak defenses that ensured our losses rather than our victories. But more importantly, the emails revealed his motivation. Cynthia had promised him county legal contracts worth $50,000 annually if he helped eliminate what she called problematic military residents from the community. This wasn't just about money or HOA disputes. This was ideological warfare against military families, and Stone was being paid handsomely to ensure we lost every legal battle while believing we had competent representation. The investigation into Cynthia's background revealed the true scope of her anti-military ideology and the systematic campaign she'd been waging against service families throughout the county. Her employment termination from the county planning department wasn't early retirement. It was termination for cause after multiple complaints about discriminatory treatment of military contractors and creating a hostile work environment based on military status. Internal memos documented her expressed view that military families bring a violent mindset and instability to civilian communities and should be prevented from establishing long-term residence in family-oriented neighborhoods. This wasn't random harassment or HOA power trips. This was systematic discrimination based on ideological hatred of the military and everything it represented. The pattern was bigger and more disturbing than I'd imagined. Records showed that Cynthia had systematically targeted 4 other military families across 2 different neighborhoods, using her county position to orchestrate bureaucratic harassment campaigns that forced each family to relocate rather than fight prolonged legal battles they couldn't afford. Her methodology was consistent: false HOA violations, county agency harassment, insurance problems, legal sabotage, and financial pressure designed to make moving away cheaper and easier than staying and fighting. She had perfected a system of bureaucratic terrorism specifically designed to drive military families out of civilian communities, and we were just the latest targets in a campaign that had been running for years. Julie's response to the leaked personnel file and the discovery of Cynthia's systematic targeting revealed capabilities and resources that completely shattered my understanding of who my wife really was. Instead of panic or fear, she immediately activated what she called base legal office coordination and began filing complaints through military channels I'd never heard of. "Time to escalate beyond civilian channels," she said with a calm authority that made my skin crawl. "This crosses federal lines now. Systematic targeting of military families violates multiple federal statutes, and base legal has jurisdiction over civilian harassment of active duty personnel." The way she talked about federal jurisdiction, military legal resources, and base coordination suggested someone with command-level authority and extensive experience dealing with civilian threats to military personnel. When I pressed her about how she knew about military family assistance programs and federal protections, her answers became increasingly sophisticated and less believable. "Every service member learns about available resources, Mark. Military takes care of its own when civilians try to exploit our service obligations," she said. But the depth of her knowledge about legal procedures, federal statutes, and base coordination protocols suggested command-level experience rather than basic enlisted awareness. She was requesting background investigations, coordinating with base legal offices, and accessing military resources with the kind of authority that comes from rank and position, not just service member status. Everything I'd believed about her role in the military was crumbling under the weight of evidence that she was someone much more important and much more dangerous than she'd ever let me know. The counterintelligence operation Julie launched through her base legal contacts revealed information about Cynthia and Stone that painted a picture of systematic corruption and ideological extremism that went far beyond neighborhood harassment. Cynthia's termination from county employment involved multiple ethics violations, inappropriate use of government resources for personal vendettas, and a documented pattern of discriminatory behavior against military families that had cost the county significant legal settlements. Stone's bar record included ethics complaints, client fund irregularities, and a history of representing clients with conflicting interests. Exactly the kind of lawyer who would sell out his own clients for county contracts and cash payments. The bigger picture was terrifying in its scope and systematic precision. This wasn't random harassment or even simple discrimination. This was an organized campaign using government resources, legal sabotage, and bureaucratic warfare to systematically eliminate military families from civilian communities. Cynthia had weaponized her county connections, corrupted the legal system, and perfected a methodology that had already succeeded in forcing 4 families to abandon their homes rather than fight battles they couldn't win. We were facing an enemy who understood our vulnerabilities, had government resources at her disposal, and was willing to commit federal crimes to achieve her ideological goals of creating military-free civilian communities. Mark confronts Stone with the money photo. Stone panics. "You don't understand. She has connections everywhere. She knows things about your wife, military things that could destroy her career. I had no choice." Before Mark can respond, Stone's phone buzzes. He reads the message, his face goes pale. "She knows you followed me. She's moving to the final phase tonight." Final phase tonight? What has Cynthia been planning all along? Stone's panicked warning about Cynthia's final phase sent chills down my spine, but it was Julie's immediate response that truly terrified me. Instead of confusion or concern, she went into what I can only describe as combat mode, checking her phone, making rapid calls in military terminology I couldn't follow, and transforming from suburban housewife into someone I'd never seen before. "Base security, this is Turner," she said into her secure phone. "Civilian threat escalation confirmed. Request immediate family protection protocols and legal intervention authorization." The authority in her voice, the professional terminology, the instant mobilization of resources, everything confirmed that my wife was someone much more important than she'd ever let me believe, and we were facing a threat serious enough to require military intervention. All legal channels were systematically blocked by the lien and lis pendens filings, which meant we couldn't refinance to pay our mounting legal bills or sell the property to escape Cynthia's harassment campaign. The mortgage company had begun foreclosure proceedings, exactly as Cynthia had planned from the beginning. Her bureaucratic siege was achieving its intended effect: financial strangulation combined with legal paralysis that would force us to abandon our home and relocate rather than fight a battle that was bankrupting us. New insurance companies wouldn't even provide quotes for coverage based on what they called ongoing legal disputes, making our property effectively unsellable, even if we could clear the liens and court filings. The investigation into Cynthia's previous campaigns revealed the full scope of her property manipulation scheme and the profits she'd been making from forcing military families into distress sales. Property records showed that her LLC had purchased each targeted family's home at significantly below market value, then immediately resold them for full market price within months. She'd profited over $60,000 from forced sales while destroying families' financial stability and driving them away from communities where they'd hoped to build permanent homes. This wasn't just ideological hatred. This was profitable discrimination that combined personal enrichment with systematic removal of military families from civilian neighborhoods. Julie's coordination with what she called military family assistance programs revealed resources and authorities that made me realize I'd been living with someone whose real job was far beyond anything I'd imagined. She was filing complaints through federal channels, requesting base legal intervention, and accessing military support systems with the kind of authority that comes from a command position rather than basic service member status. Military takes care of its own when civilians try to exploit our service obligations, she explained, but the depth of her access to federal resources, base legal coordination, and military protective protocols suggested someone with significant rank and responsibility. When I asked how she knew these programs existed and why they were taking our situation so seriously, her answers became increasingly vague and professionally defensive. The financial desperation was reaching critical mass as Cynthia's systematic assault drained our savings and closed off every escape route. My software development income couldn't cover the legal fees, insurance premiums, and mortgage payments while fighting multiple county agencies and a corrupt legal system. Julie's potential deployment, something she'd mentioned casually but never discussed in detail, could force an immediate distress sale at exactly the loss Cynthia had orchestrated for previous military families. The timing was perfect, the pressure was unbearable, and the financial mathematics were simple. Surrender and take the loss, or fight and face complete bankruptcy with no guarantee of victory. The leaked information about Cynthia's background painted a picture of ideological extremism that went far beyond typical anti-military sentiment. Her county employment termination involved documented ethics violations, inappropriate use of government resources for personal vendettas against military families, and internal memos that revealed her systematic campaign to prevent service members from establishing permanent residence in stable civilian communities. She genuinely believed that military families brought violence, instability, and transient behavior that degraded neighborhood quality and property values. This wasn't random harassment. This was systematic discrimination based on deeply held ideological beliefs about military personnel and their place in civilian society. Julie's comprehensive analysis of the digital evidence revealed the sophisticated coordination behind Cynthia's harassment campaign and demonstrated technical capabilities that raised more questions about my wife's real military role. She had compiled app filing patterns that showed coordinated timing, identified writing style analysis that proved single-source authorship across multiple supposed complainants, and traced IP address records from the HOA system that revealed multiple accounts operated from Cynthia's location. "Look at this metadata trail," she'd explain, pointing to an analysis that looked like an intelligence briefing. Coordinated timing with county actions, systematic escalation patterns, multi-vector pressure application. This is professional-level campaign coordination, not amateur neighborhood harassment. The most disturbing discovery was how extensively Cynthia had researched Julie's military background and how much classified information she'd somehow accessed. The leaked personnel file was just the beginning. She'd gathered deployment schedules, unit assignments, security clearance levels, and operational details that should have been completely inaccessible to civilian HOA presidents. Either Cynthia had developed sources within military administrative systems, or someone with access to classified personnel records was providing her with intelligence about active duty service members. The security breach implications were staggering, and Julie's reaction to the information compromise revealed someone with experience in operational security and counterintelligence procedures. The phone call I overheard that night revealed the true scope of what we were facing and confirmed my worst fears about both my wife's real identity and Cynthia's capabilities. Julie was speaking in code with someone she addressed as Sir, reporting about civilian compromise of classified operational security and requesting authorization for defensive countermeasures against a domestic threat actor. The conversation included references to asset protection protocols, security clearance vulnerability assessment, and authorization for federal intervention in civilian harassment campaign. When she hung up and found me listening, her expression mixed professional calculation with genuine concern about operational exposure. The final piece of the puzzle came when Julie explained the real stakes involved in our fight against Cynthia's campaign. "This isn't just about HOA harassment anymore, Mark," she said. And for the first time since this started, I heard genuine worry in her voice. Someone with access to classified military personnel records is providing intelligence to civilian actors for harassment campaigns against active duty service members. That's a federal crime with national security implications, and it means Cynthia isn't working alone. There are people inside military administrative systems who are compromising operational security for ideological or financial reasons. The implications were terrifying. If military personnel records were being leaked for harassment campaigns, what other classified information might be compromised, and how many service members were being targeted by civilian actors with access to their personal and professional details. Julie receives a text from an unknown number with a photo of Mark leaving the courthouse. Timestamp showing real-time tracking. Your husband just exposed our lawyer. Big mistake. Military officers shouldn't play civilian games. A 911 call goes out in 10 minutes. Hope your security clearance survives a weapons charge arrest. Clock's ticking. Company commander. 10 minutes until Cynthia's nuclear option destroys everything. How do you fight a false 911 call? The text message with real-time surveillance photos of me leaving the courthouse was the moment I realized we were dealing with something far more dangerous and coordinated than a simple HOA dispute. The timestamp showed the photo had been taken less than an hour ago, which meant Cynthia or her associates were actively tracking our movements and had the resources to coordinate immediate responses to our actions. The message was chilling in its specificity and its threats. Your husband just exposed our lawyer. Big mistake. Military officers shouldn't play civilian games. A 911 call goes out in 10 minutes. Hope your security clearance survives a weapons charge arrest. Clock's ticking. Company commander. The use of Julie's actual military rank in the threat confirmed that whoever was behind this harassment campaign had access to classified personnel information and was prepared to weaponize false criminal allegations to destroy her military career. Julie's response to the threat revealed training and capabilities that completely shattered any remaining illusions I had about her role in the military. Instead of panic or confusion, she immediately activated what appeared to be pre-planned emergency protocols, making rapid calls to base security, legal offices, and what sounded like command authority figures who took her situation seriously enough to implement immediate protective measures. Base security, this is Captain Turner, she said with calm professional authority. Domestic threat actor preparing false flag operation against active duty personnel, requesting immediate intervention and civilian law enforcement coordination. Timeline critical, less than 10 minutes to false report activation. The way she coordinated multiple agencies, used command terminology, and accessed emergency resources made it clear that my wife held significant authority and had extensive experience dealing with threats against military personnel. When the patrol cars arrived with lights flashing and officers approaching with hands on weapons, I knew we were witnessing Cynthia's nuclear option in full deployment. She'd calculated that false weapons allegations against military personnel would create maximum career damage regardless of the eventual outcome, because security clearance investigations and internal military discipline procedures would destroy Julie's reputation and prospects even if criminal charges were eventually dropped. 3 patrol cars meant felony stop procedures, which meant Cynthia had reported something serious enough to justify armed response and potential arrest of someone she'd falsely portrayed as a dangerous threat to community safety. Cynthia's performance was worthy of an Academy Award, complete with tears, shaking hands, and hysterical pointing at Julie while delivering accusations that sounded both specific and terrifying. She threatened to eliminate troublemakers, she sobbed to the lead officer. Said people like me don't deserve to live in her neighborhood. She's military and dangerous. She showed me weapons and talked about eliminating civilian obstacles to military objectives. The accusations were carefully crafted to hit every trigger point that would justify immediate arrest and maximum investigation. Threats of violence, military training being weaponized against civilians, and specific language about weapons access and elimination of targets. Even knowing it was completely fabricated, I could see how convincing her performance would be to officers responding to a weapons threat call. My terror was complete and overwhelming as I realized that false police reports with weapons allegations could destroy everything Julie had worked for in her military career. Security clearance investigations don't require criminal convictions. They require clean records and absence of any situations that suggest poor judgment, security risks, or potential for compromise. Even if the charges were eventually dropped, the arrest record, the investigation, and the allegations would permanently damage her career prospects and potentially end her military service. Cynthia had calculated the perfect career assassination tool, false criminal allegations that would destroy Julie's professional life, regardless of their ultimate legal outcome. Julie's professional response to the armed police presence demonstrated command presence and operational experience that left no doubt about her real military role and authority level. She emerged from our house with her hands clearly visible, moving slowly and deliberately, while speaking in the calm, authoritative tone of someone accustomed to managing crisis situations. "Officers, I'm Captain Julie Turner, active duty Army," she said clearly. "I understand you're responding to a weapons complaint, and I'm happy to clarify any misunderstanding about the situation. I'm currently unarmed and prepared to cooperate fully with your investigation." The professionalism, the command presence, and the natural authority in her voice made it clear that this was someone with extensive leadership experience and crisis management training. The moment that changed everything came when Julie presented her Common Access Card, the official DoD smart card that serves as military identification and contains security clearance information, unit assignment, and rank verification. The lead officer ran the card through his standard identification verification system, and the response he received over his radio changed the entire dynamic of the situation. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7-4. CAC verification shows active duty, Army officer, captain rank, current security clearance, clean service record, no disciplinary actions or security violations." The professional credentials, the clean record, and the obvious discrepancy between Cynthia's hysterical allegations and Julie's actual military standing created immediate doubt about the validity of the complaint. The complete transformation of the situation occurred when the second officer, an Army Reserve veteran, recognized both the rank insignia and the professional bearing that marked Julie as someone deserving of respect rather than suspicion. "Ma'am, I appreciate your service and your cooperation with this investigation," he said with genuine respect. "This appears to be a false complaint situation, and we'll need to document the circumstances that led to this response." So the recognition of military authority, the professional courtesy, and the immediate shift from criminal investigation to false report documentation marked the moment when Cynthia's nuclear option began exploding in her own face, rather than destroying its intended target. The presentation of comprehensive evidence that Julie had prepared demonstrated both her investigative capabilities and the systematic documentation of Cynthia's harassment campaign that would be needed for criminal prosecution of false retorting. The evidence package included timeline documentation of months of harassment, county violations, and systematic targeting, Stone's financial relationship with Cynthia, and audio evidence of the coordination between false complaints and official agency actions. "Officers, this false weapons report is the culmination of a systematic harassment campaign targeting military families," Julie explained with professional clarity. "I have comprehensive documentation of the coordination between civilian actors and corrupted legal representation, including evidence of federal crimes involving security clearance information, compromise, and systematic targeting of active duty personnel." Cynthia's final strategic mistake occurred when her ideological hatred of military personnel overcame her calculated manipulation tactics, revealing the true motivation behind her systematic harassment campaign. "I don't care about military rank," she screamed when faced with the officer's obvious respect for Julie's service and credentials. "Military people don't belong in family neighborhoods anyway. They bring violence and instability to civilian communities where children live. This proves my point about the danger they represent." The admission of anti-military bias, the explicit discrimination against service members, and the revelation of ideological motivation provided perfect evidence for federal civil rights violations and systematic targeting of military families based on their service status. The community shock was immediate and devastating, as neighbors who had been filming the confrontation realized they had witnessed an elaborate deception designed to destroy a military family through false criminal allegations. Even neighbors who had supported Cynthia's complaints about military disruption looked appalled at the revelation that she'd fabricated weapons threats and emergency situations to manipulate law enforcement against a decorated Army officer. Linda stepped away from Cynthia like she was contagious, and I could see other neighbors processing the implications of how they'd been manipulated into supporting systematic harassment of a military family based on lies, false reports, and ideological prejudice. The immediate aftermath revealed the scope of legal consequences that Cynthia would face for filing false police reports, misusing emergency services, and systematic harassment of military personnel under federal civil rights statutes. The officers began the arrest process for filing false police reports and misuse of emergency services, while Julie coordinated with base legal offices to ensure proper documentation of the federal civil rights violations that would be prosecuted under military family protection statutes. The systematic targeting, the security clearance information compromise, and the coordination with corrupted legal representation had created federal crimes that carried serious penalties and would be prosecuted with the full resources of military legal assistance programs. The coordination felt like clicking gears, tasks assigned, custody chains labeled, copies sealed. Julie didn't posture, she verified. Names, times, file hashes, report numbers. By the time the cruisers rolled, the record could stand on its own without anyone explaining it. As officers prepare to take statements, Cynthia pulls the lead officer aside, whispers urgently while pointing at Julie. The officer's expression changes to concern. He returns. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come downtown for additional questioning. There are allegations about your conduct that require investigation." Julie meets Mark's eyes. "Call Colonel Morgan. Tell him Nightingale Protocol. He'll understand." What new lies did Cynthia whisper? And what is the Nightingale Protocol? Drop a comment if you've ever seen someone's lies completely backfire on them. What happens next will blow your mind. The mysterious Nightingale Protocol that Julie referenced turned out to be a military family protection procedure that I never could have imagined existed, and Colonel Morgan's immediate response revealed the true scope of my wife's military authority and the federal resources available to protect service members from systematic civilian harassment. Within 30 minutes of my phone call, Colonel Morgan arrived with a military legal officer, a base security specialist, and coordination with federal agencies that transformed our neighborhood confrontation into a multi-jurisdictional investigation of civilian crimes against military personnel. Captain Turner has been conducting a classified investigation into systematic targeting of military families by civilian actors with access to personnel records, Colonel Morgan explained to the local police. This false report represents escalation of federal crimes involving security clearance, compromise, and organized harassment of active duty personnel. Cynthia's whispered allegations to the police officer had backfired spectacularly when military legal intervention revealed that she'd been making false claims about Julie's military conduct while simultaneously committing federal crimes involving classified information and systematic harassment. The additional questioning that the officer had mentioned was immediately canceled when base legal presented evidence that Cynthia had accessed classified personnel records without authorization and had been using that information to coordinate harassment campaigns against multiple military families. Instead of Julie being questioned about false allegations, Cynthia found herself facing federal charges for security violations, systematic civil rights violations, and conspiracy to interfere with military personnel through corrupted civilian legal processes. The emergency HOA meeting that Julie coordinated became a presentation of evidence that revealed the full scope of Cynthia's systematic harassment campaigns and the federal crimes that had been committed against multiple military families over several years. Julie presented comprehensive timeline documentation showing app manipulation, coordination with corrupted legal representation, county resource abuse, and systematic targeting campaigns that had forced 4 previous military families to abandon their homes rather than fight prolonged harassment battles. The digital evidence included IP address tracking, writing style analysis, and timing coordination that proved systematic planning and coordination rather than organic community complaints about military families disrupting neighborhood harmony. The audio evidence that security cameras had captured was devastating to any remaining support Cynthia might have had in the community because it showed her practicing the false 911 call, coaching other neighbors on false witness testimony, and discussing what she called her nuclear option strategy for destroying military families through false criminal allegations. "Call 911 and say she has weapons," Cynthia said. Her voice was clearly audible as she said, "Military people with weapons-making threats get an immediate armed response and destroy their security clearance regardless of eventual charges." The room fell completely silent as neighbors realized they'd been living next to someone who had systematically planned false emergency reports designed to destroy families through manufactured criminal allegations. The community reckoning was immediate and devastating as neighbors who had supported Cynthia's harassment campaign realized the extent of the deception and systematic manipulation they'd been subjected to for months. Linda tearfully apologized not just to us, but to the entire meeting. She threatened my family's livelihood if I didn't support her concerns about military disruption. I was terrified to oppose her county connections. and I'm ashamed that fear made me complicit in the systematic harassment of a family that was serving our country. Other neighbors shared similar stories of intimidation, threats, and blackmail that Cynthia had used to build apparent community support for her anti-military harassment campaigns. Stone's professional downfall was swift and comprehensive, as state bar investigators launched immediate investigations based on evidence of financial relationships with opposing parties, deliberate sabotage of client representation, and systematic ethics violations that had been coordinated with Cynthia's harassment campaigns. The email evidence showed advanced coordination with county agencies, predetermined weak legal defenses, and financial incentives for ensuring client losses created automatic grounds for emergency license suspension and criminal investigation of legal malpractice. His law practice reputation was destroyed overnight, and he was forced to relocate his practice to another state while facing both criminal charges and civil litigation from multiple clients he'd systematically betrayed. The federal investigation that Julie had apparently been conducting revealed systematic corruption involving county agencies, civilian access to classified military personnel records, and organized harassment campaigns targeting military families across multiple jurisdictions. Base legal office coordination with federal agencies documented Cynthia's systematic methodology, identified other civilian actors who had been accessing military personnel information inappropriately, and established monitoring protocols to protect military families from similar systematic targeting campaigns. The scope of the investigation revealed that what we'd experienced was part of a larger pattern of organized discrimination against military families that had been operating for years across multiple communities. The HOA reforms that followed Cynthia's removal were comprehensive and designed to prevent similar systematic harassment of any residents based on their profession, service status, or family circumstances. The emergency vote that removed Cynthia from all HOA positions was unanimous, and the new board immediately implemented transparent governance procedures, regular financial audits, and anti-discrimination policies that specifically protected military families and other residents from systematic targeting based on their service obligations. The new leadership also established direct coordination with base legal offices to ensure that any future complaints involving military families would be handled through appropriate channels rather than being weaponized for harassment campaigns. The financial recovery was immediate and comprehensive, as federal intervention resulted in court orders reversing all liens and judgments that had been filed through corrupted legal processes and systematic harassment campaigns. Full restitution of legal fees, plus punitive damages for civil rights violations, provided not only compensation for the financial damage we'd suffered, but also sent a clear message that systematic targeting of military families would result in severe financial consequences for perpetrators. The insurance issues were resolved.